3 days had passed since the Battle of Vareth, and Una still could not believe she was alive. She lay in a medical bed aboard the Pelith Dreadnought Eternal Vigilance, her broken bones mending under the care of alien physicians, who treated her like a hero from legend. Dr. Cho visited every few hours to check on her recovery and to argue with the Pelith doctors about treatment protocols. Some things truly never changed. The door to her room slid open, and Lieutenant Park entered carrying a data tablet. "You should be resting," he said when he saw her. Trying to sit up. "I have been resting for 3 days." Una replied, "I am tired of resting." Park smiled and handed her the tablet. "Then you might want to see this." The screen showed a live feed from the Galactic Assembly on the Sara. Prime Ambassador Velith stood before representatives of over 100 species, his thin form somehow commanding attention despite his small stature. "3 days ago, I witnessed something I did not believe possible," Velith was saying. "I watched a single human woman defy an empire." The chamber fell silent as he continued. "Commander Una Seong had every reason to surrender, and her own government had ordered her to abandon my people. But she refused because she believed that some principles are worth dying for." He gestured, and a holographic display materialized showing footage of the battle. Una watched herself pilot the Defiant Promise through the enemy fleet, saw the desperate maneuvers and the thumb-measured impossible shots and the final moments before her ship was destroyed. She had not realized how close to death she had actually come. The collective Dominion sent 18 warships to kill 1 diplomat and silence 1 truth, Relith continued. "They brought enough firepower to glass a continent, and they thought they had won." He paused for effect. They were wrong. The footage shifted to show the Allied fleet arriving, species that had been neutral for centuries, fighting together for the first time. When the galaxy saw what one human would sacrifice for others, something changed, Velith said. "We realized that if we did not stand together against tyranny, then tyrants would destroy us one by one." A Kovathi delegate rose from her seat. "What does the Rathani collective propose?" she asked. Velith straightened his angular body. "I propose a formal alliance between all species represented in this assembly," he declared. "I propose that we declare the collective Dominion a threat to galactic peace and take unified action against their aggression." Murmurs swept through the chamber. And who would lead this alliance? A Pelith representative demanded. Velith smiled in the way his species showed respect. "I believe the humans have earned that right," he replied. The chamber erupted in heated debate, but Una could see which way the vote would go. She turned off the display and lay back against her pillow. "This is really happening," she murmured. "You sound surprised," Park said. "I thought I was going to die alone in the dark," Una admitted. "I had accepted that my death would be meaningless to everyone except the people on those shuttles." She looked at her old friend with something like wonder. "Instead, I accidentally started an interstellar war." Park laughed. "Only you could turn a last stand into a diplomatic revolution." The door opened again, and Dr. Cho entered with Ensign Quan close behind. "I heard the broadcast," Cho said with barely contained excitement. "The Assembly is voting on the Alliance proposal right now." Quan was practically bouncing with energy. "Commander, there are delegations from 12 different species waiting to meet you. And the Kovathi want to give you a medal, and the Pelith are writing songs about the battle." "And breathe," Una interrupted gently. "I am not going anywhere." She looked at the 3 people gathered around her bed, her family and everything but blood. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. They fell silent, sensing the shift in her tone. "When I sent you away on those shuttles, I believed I would never see you again," Una continued. "I had made peace with dying, and I was ready for it." She took a shaky breath. "But then I heard Taiwan's voice on that channel and everything changed." Park reached out and took her hand. We talked about it after we escaped, he said. Every single person on those shuttles wanted to turn around immediately. And Ambassador Velith was the one who convinced us to broadcast the battle first. He said that if we were going to die, then the galaxy should witness our sacrifice. Cho added. He believed that watching you fight would inspire others to join us. He was right. Quan said softly. Yuna felt tears prickling at her eyes. You should have kept going, she whispered. The mission was more important than my life. No, Park said firmly. It was not. He squeezed her hand tighter. You taught us that humans never abandon their own. And when we saw you standing alone against that fleet, we knew we had to come back. The mission succeeded because we came back, Cho pointed out. If we had run away, then Veleth's testimony would have been about a tragic defeat. But instead, he got to show the galaxy what humans do when their people are in danger. We fight for each other, Quan finished. No matter the odds. Yuna closed her eyes and let the tears fall freely. She had spent so long believing that leadership meant bearing burdens alone. She had never considered that true strength might mean letting others share the weight. The door chimed and a Peleth attendant entered with news. Commander Siong. The massive being rumbled. The Galactic Assembly has reached a verdict. Everyone in the room held their breath. The Alliance proposal has passed with overwhelming support. The attendant announced. 93 species have pledged their forces to the coalition against the collective dominion. Cheers erupted from Park and the others. But the attendant was not finished. Additionally, the Peleth continued. You have been nominated to serve as the first human liaison to the Allied Command. And your first duty will be to address the Assembly tomorrow. Yuna stared at the attendant in shock. Me? I am just a frigate commander. You are the woman who united the galaxy, the Peleth replied simply. There is no one else the Assembly would accept. After the attendant left, Yuna sat in stunned silence. This is a mistake. She finally said, I am not a diplomat, and I do not know anything about running an interstellar coalition. You know how to inspire people, Park replied. That is all that matters, and you will have help, Cho added. Ambassador Velith has already volunteered to serve as your advisor. The whole crew wants to transfer to whatever command you take next, Quan blurted out. We already started a petition. Yuna looked at her friends with overwhelming gratitude. I cannot do this alone. She admitted. Park smiled warmly. That is the point, Commander. And you will never have to. 1 week later, Yuna stood before the Galactic Assembly in her dress uniform. Her cane, the only visible sign of her injuries, behind her sat delegations from 93 species who had chosen to stand against tyranny. Before her sat a galaxy, waiting to hear what humanity had to say. I am not a politician, Yuna began. I am a soldier who got lucky and survived a battle she should have lost. She paused and looked out at the thousands of beings watching her. But I learned something in that battle that I want to share with all of you. She took a deep breath. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear. And it is not even the willingness to die for what you believe. Her voice grew stronger. Courage is standing alone in the dark, because you know your friends are watching, and trusting that they will find a way to stand with you. She gestured at the Allied delegations behind her. Look at what we have built in just 1 week. Because 93 species decided that they would rather fight together than fall apart. Her final words echoed through the chamber. The collective dominion thinks they can divide us. But they forgot one thing, and they forgot that we are stronger together than we could ever be alone. The assembly rose in thunderous applause, and somewhere in the crowd, Lieutenant Park smiled at his commander with pride that words could never express. She had been ready to die alone. Instead, she had shown a galaxy how to live together. That was the most human thing of all. Darkness crept at the edges of Yuna's vision as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The bridge of the Defiant. Promise was silent, except for the occasional spark from damaged consoles and the distant groan of dying metal. She had given everything to save her people, and now there was nothing left but the waiting. Through the cracked viewport, she could see Casher's flagship, approaching slowly like a predator savoring its wounded prey. The warlord was taking his time, probably wanting to make her suffer before the end. Yuna did not mind the delay. Every second she remained alive was a second further that her crew traveled towards safety. She thought about the people she was dying to protect. Lieutenant Park, with his infectious laugh and his pictures of his children that he showed to anyone who would look. Dr. Cho, who had been her friend since their academy days and who made terrible jokes during the worst moments of every crisis. Ensign Quan, who reminded her so much of herself at that age. All nervous energy and desperate need to prove his worth. Ambassador Velith, who had shown her that even beings from distant stars could become family given enough time. They were safe now. The shuttles had jumped to hyperspace and the Dominion could not follow whatever happened next. Yuna had accomplished her mission, reactor core breach, in 4 minutes. The computer announced, its voice warped almost beyond recognition. Yuna accepted the information without reaction. 4 minutes or 40 seconds. It made no difference. She was too broken to move and too tired to care. Blood pooled beneath her command chair, and she wondered distantly how much a human could lose before the darkness became permanent. Her thoughts drifted to her family back on Earth. Her sister Jian would be devastated when she received the news. Her 2 nieces would grow up knowing their aunt only through stories and old photographs. Yuna wished she could see them one more time, could tell them that dying for something meaningful was better than living for nothing at all. The communication console crackled with static. Yuna ignored it, assuming it was just another system failing. But then a voice cut through the interference. A voice she knew as well as her own commander. Lieutenant Park said urgently, "Commander, please respond." Yuna's eyes snapped open. "Taiwan?" she whispered, not believing what she was hearing. "We are coming back for you," Park continued. "Hold on just a little longer." "No," Yuna said with sudden strength born of fear. "No, you have to keep going. That is an order. With respect, Commander, I am choosing to ignore that order." Anger surged through Yuna's broken body. She had sacrificed everything to save them, and now they were throwing it away. "The Dominion will destroy you," she shouted into the console. "Turn around and complete the mission." Park's voice remained calm despite her fury. "Commander, you forgot one." Yuna paused in confusion. "Forgot one what?" "You forgot," Park said, "that we never leave our people behind either." The tactical display flickered back to life as emergency power rerouted through damaged circuits. Yuna stared at the screen with growing disbelief. The evacuation shuttles were indeed returning. But they were not alone. Behind them came a ragged collection of ships that made no military sense, mining vessels from the moon below, armed with nothing but industrial lasers meant for cutting rock cargo haulers that had been hiding in the outer system, civilian transports carrying refugees who had chosen to fight rather than flee. And emerging from hyperspace behind them all came warships bearing flags that Yuna had never seen fly together before. A Rithani battlecruiser leading a formation of insectoid fighters. 3 Kavati destroyers with their distinctive spiral hulls. A massive Pelith dreadnought covered in ceremonial markings. More ships followed from species Yuna had only read about in diplomatic briefings. 12 different flags united in a fleet that should not exist. What is happening? She breathed. Ambassador Valeth's voice replaced Park's on the channel. "I broadcast everything, Commander Xiao," he explained. "Every moment of your battle, every sacrifice you made, and every word you spoke about protecting the people you love." His translator conveyed something that sounded almost like wonder. "The neutral species watched you stand alone against impossible odds." Veleth continued. "They watched you refuse to surrender, even when surrender would have saved your life. And they watched you choose death over abandoning your principles. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of history. They are no longer neutral. Yuna felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the Allied fleet engage the Dominion forces. Casher's ships scattered in confusion as they suddenly found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. The warlord had come to this system expecting an easy victory. Instead, he had sparked a war that his collective Dominion could not win. All ships focused fire on the Dominion flagship. A Kovathi commander ordered, "Protect the human vessel." The battle raged around the crippled, defiant promise as alien species fought side by side for the first time in galactic history. Rithani fighters wove through Dominion formations with deadly precision. Kovathi destroyers unleashed weapons that tore through enemy shields. The Pelith dreadnought advanced like an unstoppable mountain, absorbing fire that would have destroyed lesser vessels, and through it all the mining ships and cargo haulers did their part, distracting enemies and creating opportunities for the warships to exploit. Commander, Dr. Cho's voice came through the channel. "We are approaching your position, and I need you to get to an airlock for emergency evacuation." Yuna looked down at her shattered leg and the blood soaking her uniform. "I cannot walk," she admitted. "Then crawl," Cho replied firmly. "You are not dying today, Yuna. Not after everything you did to save us." Yuna laughed weakly at her friend's stubborn tone. Some things never changed. She dragged herself from the command chair and fell to the deck with a gasp of agony. Every movement sent fire through her broken bones. But she forced herself forward anyway. If her people had come back for her, then she owed it to them to try. The corridor between the bridge and the nearest airlock was only 50 meters long. It felt like 50 kilometers. Yuna crawled through smoke and sparks and falling debris, pulling herself along with hands that left bloody prints on the deck. Behind her, the reactor core continued its countdown toward destruction. Around her, the ship groaned and screamed as it died piece by piece. But ahead of her was the airlock, and beyond that airlock were the people who had refused to let her sacrifice herself alone. She reached the door just as a shuttle matched speed with the defiant promise. Through the small window, she could see Park at the controls, his face tight with desperate concentration. The docking clamps engaged with a heavy thunk. The airlock cycled open, and there was Dr. Cho reaching for her with tears streaming down her face. "I told you I would see you again," Cho said as she pulled Yuna into the shuttle. Yuna tried to respond, but the words would not come. She had been ready to die. She had accepted her fate and made peace with it. And now she was being given a second chance that she had never expected. The shuttle detached from the defiant promise just as the reactor core finally breached. The explosion lit up the void like a small sun, consuming the ship that had been Yuna's home for 3 years. She watched it burn through the shuttle window and felt a strange mix of grief and gratitude. That ship had saved her people. It had been a good death for a good vessel, Commander. Ensign Quan reported from the communication station. "The Dominion fleet is retreating, and Warlord Kasker is ordering all ships to withdraw." Cheers erupted throughout the shuttle as the news spread. They had won, against all odds. They had actually won. Yuna lay on the deck surrounded by her crew. Too weak to move, but alive enough to smile. Park knelt beside her and took her hand. "You are the most stubborn human I have ever met," he said with a shaky voice. "And I have never been more proud to serve under anyone. You disobeyed a direct order." Yuna replied weakly, "Court-martial me later." Park said with a wet laugh. Ambassador Veleth appeared in the shuttle doorway, his insectoid form somehow conveying deep emotion despite his alien features. "The Galactic Assembly will hear my testimony tomorrow," he announced, "and I will tell them about the human commander who stood alone against darkness so that others could live." He clicked his mandibles in the Rithani gesture of highest respect. "You changed the galaxy today, Commander Siang," he said. "Never forget that." Yuna closed her eyes as Dr. Cho began treating her wounds. She had gone into this battle expecting to die alone. Instead, she had found something she had not known. She was missing a galaxy full of friends she had not met yet, and a crew that loved her too much to let her go. The defiant promise screamed through space like a wounded animal fighting for survival. Yuna worked the controls with desperate precision as enemy fire exploded around her ship. 2 Dominion destroyers had broken from the main formation to pursue her, their weapons lighting up the darkness with deadly beauty. She rolled the frigate hard to starboard and felt the hull groan in protest. The ship was not designed for maneuvers this aggressive, but Yuna did not care about long-term damage anymore. She only needed the defiant promise to survive long enough to let her people escape. Warning. The computer announced calmly, hull integrity at 62%, and recommend reducing evasive maneuvers. Recommendation ignored. Yuna muttered as she dove toward a nearby asteroid field. The pursuing destroyers followed without hesitation. They were faster and better armed. But they had one weakness that Yuna intended to exploit. They were overconfident. She wove through the tumbling rocks with the skill of someone who had spent years training in environments just like this. The first destroyer tried to follow her exact path and clipped an asteroid that spun into its flight trajectory. The impact tore away its forward shields and left it vulnerable. Yuna reversed thrust suddenly and fired her remaining missiles directly into the wounded ship. The explosion was spectacular as the destroyer broke apart in a shower of debris and flame. 1 down. She breathed. 17 to go. But the second destroyer had learned from its companion's mistake. It pulled back to a safe distance and began firing from long range, forcing Yuna to abandon the asteroid cover. She emerged into open space to find 3 more enemy ships converging on her position. Casher's voice crackled over the communication channel. Impressive flying for a human. He admitted grudgingly, but you cannot run forever. Who said anything about running? Yuna replied. She angled a defiant promise directly toward the gap between 2 of the closing ships. They assumed she was trying to slip through and escape, so they adjusted their vectors to close the gap. Instead, Yuna cut her engines completely and let momentum carry her forward. The 2 ships continued their convergence. Not realizing that their firing solutions now intersected with each other, Yuna waited until the last possible moment and then fired her emergency thrusters to drop below the engagement plane. The 2 Dominion vessels opened fire. Simultaneously, their weapons tore through the space where the defiant promise had been moments. The foreign struck each other. Instead, one ship lost its engines in the exchange. The other suffered catastrophic damage to its weapons array. Neither was destroyed, but both were effectively removed from the fight. Yuna permitted herself a small smile of satisfaction as she accelerated away from the disabled vessels. How is this possible? Casca roared over the open channel. She is one human in a broken ship, far away on the escaping shuttles. Lieutenant Park watched the battle unfold on his tactical screen. Tears streamed down his face as he witnessed his commander performing miracles against impossible odds. She is magnificent, Ambassador Vela said from beside him. I have never seen combat piloting like this from any species. That is because you have never seen Yuna Xiong when she is protecting her people. Park replied with fierce pride. Dr. Cho moved through the crowded shuttle, checking on the wounded, but her eyes kept returning to the distant flashes of light that marked the ongoing battle. How long can she hold out? She asked quietly. I do not know, Park admitted, but she will fight until the end, and I hate that I know that about her. Back on the defiant promise, Yuna was running out of tricks. The Dominion fleet had adapted to her tactics and now moved in coordinated groups that left no gaps to exploit. She had destroyed or disabled 4 enemy ships, but 14 remained, and her own vessel was falling apart around her. Hull integrity at 31%. The computer reported multiple breaches on decks 3 through 7, and life support failing in non-essential sections. Una sealed the damaged areas and rerouted power to the remaining shields. She had maybe 20 minutes before the ship became completely uncontrollable. 20 minutes to keep the Dominion focused on her instead of the fleeing shuttles. She checked the tactical display and felt a surge of relief. The evacuation craft had rounded the moon and were accelerating toward the system's edge. In another 15 minutes, they would be far enough to engage their jump drives and escape. 15 minutes. She just needed to survive 15 more minutes. Tasker seemed to sense that time was running out. All ships concentrate fire on the human vessel, he commanded. I want her destroyed now. The Dominion fleet closed in like a tightening fist. Una fought with everything she had, spinning and diving and using every piece of debris as temporary cover. But there were too many enemies and too few options. A heavy cannon blast struck the Defiant Promise amidships and the ship shuddered violently. Shields offline. The computer announced. Weapon systems at 15% capacity. Another hit tore away the port engine nacelle. Una was thrown from her chair as the artificial gravity flickered. She pulled herself back to the controls with bleeding hands and continued fighting. You cannot win. Casca broadcast with cruel satisfaction. Surrender now, and I will make your death quick. I am not trying to win. Una replied through gritted teeth. I am trying to make sure you remember what one human can do when you threaten her family. She checked the tactical display again. 12 minutes until the shuttles could jump. She could do this. She had to do this. The next few minutes became a blur of desperate maneuvers and failing systems. Una lost count of how many times she should have died. A missile that detonated meters from her hull. A cannon blast that missed the bridge by centimeters. A collision with debris that somehow did not breach the command deck. Through it all, she kept flying, kept fighting, kept refusing to give up. And then the worst happened. A concentrated barrage from Casher's flagship struck the Defiant Promise directly in the reactor housing. The explosion threw Una across the bridge and into the far wall. She felt ribs crack on impact and tasted blood in her mouth. Critical damage detected, the computer said, its voice distorting as power systems failed. Reactor containment failing. And estimated time to core breach is 8 minutes. Una tried to stand and collapsed immediately. Her left leg was broken, twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn. She crawled back to the command console and pulled herself up with her arms alone. The tactical display flickered, but still functioned. 5 minutes until the shuttles could jump. She had to hold on for 5 more minutes. All Dominion vessels. Casca announced triumphantly. The human ship is crippled, and move in to finish her. 14 warships converged on the dying Defiant Promise. Una had no weapons left, no shields, no way to fight back. But she still had engines. Barely she rooted every remaining scrap of power to the maneuvering thrusters and pointed her broken ship directly at Casher's flagship. What is she doing? Someone asked over the Dominion tactical channel. Casca realized the answer too late. She means to ram. Yes, he roared. All ships evade. The Dominion fleet scattered in sudden panic as the Defiant Promise accelerated toward them on a collision course. It was a bluff. Una knew she could not actually reach the flagship before the reactor exploded, but the enemy did not know that their desperate evasion bought her precious seconds as they broke formation and fled. From the path of her suicide run, Una watched the tactical display as the timer counted down. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. The shuttles engaged their jump drives and vanished into hyperspace. They were safe. Her people were safe. Una slumped back in her chair and let the pain finally wash over her blood. Drip from a dozen wounds, and her vision was starting to blur. The Dominion fleet had realized her deception and was returning. But it no longer mattered. She had one human commander. Casher's voice came through one last time. You have cost me 4 ships and made a fool of me before my fleet. But now you will die alone and forgotten." Yuna laughed weakly. "I will die knowing that I saved the people I love." She replied, "Can you say the same when your time comes?" She closed her eyes as the enemy ships moved in for the kill. She had nothing left to give, but she had given everything she had, and that was enough. The corridors of the Defiant Promise filled with controlled chaos as the crew prepared for evacuation. Yuna walked through her ship one final time, helping where she could and offering words of comfort to those who needed them. She had commanded this vessel for 3 years, and every scratch on the walls told a story she remembered. Here was the dent from when Ensign Quan had crashed a cargo loader during his first week. Aboard, there was the scorch mark from a plasma conduit that had exploded during the Battle of Sentinel Station, and everywhere she looked, she saw the faces of people she loved preparing to leave her. Forever, Lieutenant Park found her in the engine room where she was checking the reactor output. "Commander," he said stiffly, "I must formally protest this plan. Your protest is noted." Yuna replied without looking up from the console, "You are throwing your life away." Park continued with anger creeping into his voice. "There has to be another option." Yuna finally turned to face him. "Taiwan," she said, using his first name for the first time in months. "I have run every scenario in my head 100 times. And this is the only way to save the ambassador and the refugees on the moon below. What about saving yourself?" he demanded. "Some things are more important than one person," she said simply. Park grabbed her shoulders with desperate strength. "You are not just one person to us," he said with his voice breaking. "You are our commander and our friend, and the woman who taught me that duty and compassion can exist together. So how am I supposed to go back to my family and tell them that I left you here to die?" Yuna gently removed his hands from her shoulders, but held them for a moment. "You tell them that I made my choice," she said. "And you tell them that I died protecting the people I love. Because that is a death worth having, Doctor." Cho appeared in the doorway with her medical bag over her shoulder. "The wounded are loaded onto the shuttles," she reported. "We have room for maybe 50 more people. What about the refugees on the moon?" Yuna asked. "Ambassador Velith has been communicating with them," Cho replied. "They are hiding in the underground mining tunnels. And if we can draw the Dominion away, then they might survive long enough for help to arrive." Yuna nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Then we proceed as planned." She led them back to the bridge, where the remaining crew had gathered. 47 people stood before her in their worn uniforms, with fear and determination written equally on their faces. These were engineers and medics and soldiers, and scientists who had chosen to serve aboard a small frigate patrolling the edges of human space. They had not signed up to die in an impossible battle against overwhelming odds, but not one of them complained, not one of them asked to stay behind with her. They simply waited for her final orders with the trust that she had earned over years of shared hardship. "I want to thank all of you," Yuna began. "Not just for your service, but for being the best crew I could have asked for. And I know that whatever happens today, you will make me proud." Ensign Quan stepped forward from the crowd. "Commander," he said nervously, "I want you to know that serving under you has been the honor of my life. And when I joined the Navy, I was just a scared kid from Bizen who did not know anything about courage. But you taught me what it means to stand for something bigger than yourself." Other voices joined in as crew members shared their own words of gratitude and farewell. Yuna listened to each one with a full heart, memorizing their faces because she knew she would never see them again when the last person had spoken. She straightened her uniform and assumed the posture of command one final time. "Your shuttle assignments have been sent to your personal devices," she announced. "Departure will begin in 15 minutes. And I expect you all to follow Lieutenant Park's orders, as you would follow mine. Park started to protest again, but Una silenced him with a look. That is not a request, Lieutenant. Because when I'm gone, you will be the senior officer and these people will need you. She turned to Ambassador Velith, who had remained silent throughout the ceremony. Ambassador, I am trusting you to carry our story to the Galactic Assembly. Velith clicked his mandibles in the Rathani gesture of deep respect. I have witnessed many species in my diplomatic career, he said. The Vorath fight for conquest, the Thalani fight for resources, and the Marthaki fight because they know nothing else. But humans are different. He paused, and his compound eyes seemed to shimmer with emotion that his translator could not fully convey. Humans fight for each other. He continued. You sacrifice not for glory or power, but for love. And that is something I did not believe was possible until I met your species. We are not special, Una said quietly. We just refuse to give up on the people we care about. That is exactly what makes you special. Velith replied. The evacuation began with mechanical precision as crew members filed toward the shuttle bay in orderly lines. Una stood at the bridge watching the tactical display. As her people left the ship, the Dominion fleet maintained its position, apparently content to wait for her response to Casher's ultimatum. They did not know that she had already made her decision. Dr. Cho was among the last to leave. She stopped at the bridge entrance and turned back to face her commander and friend Una. She said softly, I delivered both your nieces when your sister gave birth on Ganymede Station, and I was there when you received the news that your parents had passed. And I have watched you grow from a young ensign into the finest officer I have ever known. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she struggled to continue. Please do not ask me to say goodbye. She whispered. Una crossed the bridge and embraced her tightly. Then do not say goodbye, she murmured. Say that you will see me again, even if we both know it is not true. Cho pulled back and wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I will see you again, she said, in whatever comes after this life. Then she was gone and Una was alone. On the bridge of her dying ship, she allowed herself 30 seconds to feel the grief that threatened to overwhelm her. 30 seconds to cry for the friends she would never see again. 30 seconds to mourn the future she would never have. Then she wiped her face and sat down in the command chair. Computer, she said clearly. Transfer all tactical control to manual override. Authorization Seong Alpha 77. Manual override confirmed. The computer replied. All systems now under direct command control. Through the viewport, Una could see the first shuttle departing from the hangar bay. It was small and fragile against the vast darkness of space, carrying 40 people she had sworn to protect. More shuttles followed in quick succession, each one slipping away from the Defiant Promise and heading toward the far side of the moon, where they would hopefully escape detection. Commander, Seong to all evacuation craft, she broadcast on a secure channel. Maintain radio silence until you are clear of the system, and do not turn back for any reason. Park's voice came back immediately. Commander, we cannot just leave you. You can and you will, Una replied firmly. That is my final order, Lieutenant. She switched off the channel. Before he could argue further on the tactical display, she watched the enemy fleet beginning to stir. They had detected the shuttles. Una smiled grimly and opened a broadcast channel to the Dominion flagship Warlord Kaskar. She announced, This is Commander Seong of the Defiant Promise, and I have an answer to your ultimatum. Kasher's scaled face appeared on her screen. Have you decided to be reasonable? He asked with cruel amusement. I have decided, Una said, that you can go to hell. She cut the transmission and pushed the engines to full power. The Defiant Promise surged forward directly toward the Dominion fleet. 18 warships against 1. Damaged frigate. The odds had not changed, but Yuna was no longer trying to win. She was just trying to buy enough time for her people to escape. And for that, she would fight until her last breath. The Bridge of the Defiant. Promise burned with red emergency lights as commander. Yuna Xiang stared at the tactical display. Before her, 18 enemy warships surrounded her damaged frigate like wolves circling wounded prey. She had fought in 12 major engagements during her career with the United Earth Navy, and she had never seen odds this terrible, commander. Shields are down to 19%. Lieutenant Taiwan Park reported from the engineering station. His voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We cannot survive another direct assault. Yuna nodded slowly as she studied the enemy formation. The collective Dominion had planned this ambush perfectly. 3 predatory species working together with one goal: to kill everyone aboard her ship. What is our weapons status? She asked. Forward cannons are offline, Park replied. We have 2 missile tubes operational and maybe 30 minutes of ammunition if we fire continuously. 30 minutes against 18 warships. The math was simple and cruel. Dami Rei Cho emerged from the medical bay with blood on her uniform. I have stabilized the wounded, she said. 14 crew members need serious medical attention that I cannot provide here, and we have lost 6 people already. Yuna closed her eyes for a moment. 6 of her people were dead. 6 families would receive messages that would destroy their world. She opened her eyes and pushed the grief aside because she could not afford to feel it yet. Ensign Quan. She called to the young communications officer. Any response from Fleet Command? Jinho Quan turned from his console with a pale face. Yes, Commander, he said. Orders just came through. He hesitated, and Yuna knew immediately that the news was bad. Read them, she commanded. Fleet Command orders the Defiant. Promise to abandon all non-essential personnel and retreat to Rally Point 7 immediately, Quan read, his voice breaking slightly. They say the ambassador is an acceptable loss. Silence fell across the bridge. Ambassador Soren Veleth stood near the observation window, his insectoid body completely still as he processed what he had just heard. His compound eyes reflected the distant explosions of the battle raging around them. I understand, Veleth said in his clicking voice that the translator rendered into calm English. Your leaders are correct, Commander, and my life is not worth the lives of your entire crew. With respect, Ambassador, Yuna said firmly, that decision is not yours to make. She turned to face her crew. These men and women had served with her for 3 years. They had bled together and laughed together and mourned together. She knew their families and their dreams and their fears. I'm going to refuse this order, she announced. The Dominion attacked us during a diplomatic mission, and they want silence. Ambassador Veleth, before he can testify to the Galactic Assembly. And if they succeed, then 12 neutral species will never learn the truth about Dominion war crimes. Park stepped forward. Commander, refusing a direct order from Fleet Command is grounds for court-martial. I know, Yuna replied. The odds of survival are almost 0. Dr. Cho added, I know that too. Yuna said. Ensign Quan swallowed hard. What are your orders then, Commander? Before Yuna could answer, the communication console screamed with a nod. Incoming broadcast. A face appeared on the main screen that made Yuna's blood turn cold. Warlord Kaskar of the Vorath was a massive creature covered in armored scales with teeth designed for tearing flesh. His species had conquered 40 worlds through pure brutality, and he personally had ordered the deaths of millions. Human Commander. Kaskar growled through the translator. I offer you a single chance to live. So surrender the Rethani ambassador, and I will allow your ship to leave. Una stepped toward the screen. And if I refuse? Casker smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Then I will destroy the refugee settlement on the moon below, he said. 40,000 civilians from 6 different species, and their deaths will be on your conscience. The bridge erupted in horrified whispers. Una felt her heart crack as she understood. The trap, if she surrendered the ambassador, then the Dominion would silence the only witness to their crimes and continue their conquest unopposed. If she refused, then 40,000 innocent people would die. There was no choice that saved everyone. You have 1 hour to decide, Casker said. I look forward to your answer, little human. The screen went dark. Ambassador Velith moved toward Una with his thin legs clicking against the deck. Commander Sion, he said gently, you must surrender me, because 40,000 lives are worth more than 1 diplomat. If I give you to them, then millions more will die in the wars to come. Una replied, your testimony is the only thing that can unite the neutral species against the Dominion. Then what do we do? Park asked desperately. Una turned to the tactical display again. Her mind raced through possibilities and discarded them one by one. They could not fight 18 warships. They could not outrun the enemy with damaged engines. They could not call for help because no Iron forces were close enough. But maybe they did not need to do any of those things. How many people can we fit on the auxiliary craft? She asked. Suddenly Park calculated quickly. If we pack them tight, then maybe 200. But Commander, the shuttles cannot fight their way through the blockade. They will not need to fight, Una said, as a plan formed in her mind. Not if the Dominion thinks the ambassador is still on the Defiant Promise. Understanding dawned on the faces around her. You want to use the frigate as a decoy, Dr. Cho said slowly. Yes, Una confirmed. We evacuate the crew and the ambassador onto the auxiliary craft. And then the Defiant Promise draws the enemy away while the shuttles escape in the opposite direction. That could work, Park admitted. But someone would need to stay behind to pilot the ship and make it look like the full crew is still aboard. I know, Una said quietly. The bridge fell silent again as everyone understood what she was saying. No, Park said firmly. Absolutely not. I am the best pilot on this ship. Una continued as if he had not spoken. I am the only one who can make the Dominion believe the whole crew is still fighting. And the maneuvers required will be beyond what the autopilot can handle. Then I will stay instead, Park declared. You are the commander, and you should escape with the crew. Una shook her head. You have a wife and 2 children waiting for you on Earth, Taiwan, and I have no one. That is not true, Dr. Cho protested with tears forming in her eyes. You have us. Una smiled sadly at her old friend. And that is exactly why I must do this, she said. Because I would rather die than watch any of you sacrifice yourselves when I could have prevented it. Ambassador Velith watched this exchange with growing wonder in all his years of diplomatic service across dozens of species. He had never seen anything like this. These humans argued not about who would escape, but about who would earn the right to die for the others. Your species continues to amaze me, he said softly. Una turned to him. Ambassador, I need you to survive and reach the Galactic Assembly no matter what happens here today. Because the galaxy needs to know the truth. Velith bowed his angular head. I will carry your story with me, Commander Sial. And I swear that your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Una nodded and then faced her crew one final time. Begin evacuation procedures, she ordered. You have 45 minutes to get everyone off this ship. No one moved. They stood looking at her with a mixture of love and grief and desperate hope that somehow this would not be goodbye. That was an order. Una said gently, Now go, and let me do my job. One by one, they turned to their tasks. and Una stood alone at the center of the bridge, watching them prepare to leave her behind. She was not afraid to die. She was only afraid that her death would not be enough to save them.